And we are live with Bruce Balentine. Bruce, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for making the time. It's an honor to be speaking with you. You and I have been fellow travelers for a long time. Um,
A very
I've,
long time,
I
yes.
have learned a lot from your work, and so I want to spend this hour with you, trying to delve into matters that are of interest to both of us professionally. And let me start with this basic question, which probably is hard to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, if you were to describe in a sentence or two what preoccupies you professionally, uh, what would you say, like to somebody who is not in this field? How would you describe what you do?
Well, it is a difficult question. Um, I, as you know, I'm semi-retired, so I spent many, many years working on spoken user interfaces of
Mhm.
all kinds, using all of the various voice and speech technologies to build working applications that had real-world use and real users using them. And so during the course of all those years, I learned quite a bit about what works, what doesn't work, where the biases lie in the client's minds as well as in the minds of designers and professionals in the field. So I've started encapsulating those years of experience into some software tools, modest little software tools that I'm working on now to provide teaching materials that allow there's a lot of young designers that are very skilled and happy in the GUI world, the WIMP world, they call it, Windows, icons, menus, pointing
Mhm.
devices. And they're interested in breaking into speech, but they're running into barriers, major barriers in terms of absorbing the knowledge that's required, developing skills without having to learn kind of by the seat of the pants on the fly. And it's quite a bit to learn. It's like drinking from a fire hose.
Mhm.
And one of the major problems, I think, is the absence of the kinds of standardizations that exist now in the GUI world.
Mhm.
Instead, we have this broad, kind of vague idea of human like conversation. Somehow the machine is going to talk to the user, and the user is going to talk to the machine, and they're going to be on speaking terms, as it were. They're going to
Mhm.
get some kind of work done. And I think the industry has been a little bit lost for some time
Mhm.
in pursuing this because it's a relatively poor goal all the way around. Speech is often a solution in search of a problem
Mhm.
rather
Mhm.
than vice versa. So I try to devote my time to building teaching tools and facilitating workshops and helping especially young or outside of the speech world designers develop some feel for how we can use mechanical speech to do real useful things. Sorry, that was a long answer, but
No, that's great. That's
it's
great.
the best I can do.
That's uh that's two sentences with lots of semicolons in there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. Wonderful. So give me an example of a conceptual problem or a practical problem that you help these students with. What would be something that a GUI person has a hard time grasping that your tools would help them grasp more easily?
Well, of course, the main difference is that speech is a temporal interface, not a
Hmm.
spatial interface. And so most of the skills that designers have developed revolve around the three dimensions of space. And they often have gotten degrees in not necessarily HCI, human computer interaction, but
Hmm.
more in graphical design,
Hmm.
marketing. And many of them are artists. They draw well, they paint well, they have a good sense of color, and those sorts of things. It's very difficult to map those skills from space onto time. The passage of time changes the interface a great deal
Yeah.
because in a speech interface, the passage of time changes the context of the interface very quickly, even if the user does nothing. In a
Hmm.
graphical interface, the user can sit and think and look at things and observe things without time being a problem. But in a spoken interface, once the conductor drops his baton, then you start at the beginning and you've got to go all the way through to the end of your, we call them conversations now. I always still, to this day, like to call them dialogues instead.
Hmm.
because I think of the way humans talk to machines as being kind of like the way jazz musicians improvise with each other.
Hmm. Hmm.
Jazz musicians have licks and riffs that they draw on, a portfolio of different gadgets, as it were, and they just weave them all together. It sounds like they're making stuff up at once, but they're not. They're calling on automatic hand memory that can play scales, or that can make a blue note bluer, or that can bend a note in just the right way. And they have a set. It's a relatively limited set. Even very good jazz players have a set of probably hundreds, no more than hundreds, of these licks and riffs. Human beings, similarly, tend to use redundant and repetitive linguistic licks and riffs. Um, Normal, everyday kinds of phrasings, including all the disfluencies and the other attributes. It's not as open-ended and as incredibly intelligent as it's made out to be.
Hmm.
And so the first thing is to calm the designers down so that they can learn that they can learn, so that they learn that this is a masterable thing. You don't have to become a linguist or a signal processing expert or something like that to build these dialogues. What you have to do is think about the passage of time, focus on the task, and then just weave together these licks and riffs in much the same way you would put beads on a string to make a
Hmm.
necklace.
Hmm.
Solve each one of the beads, and the flow of the beads going one to the next will often take care of itself.
Yeah.
And the second, I guess there is one other thing that's important, and that is stop thinking about success and start thinking about errors,
Hmm.
because it's the errors that kill you in a speech interface. And they come from turn taking problems, background noise problems, misunderstandings, of course, perceptually and cognitively between the two interlocutors, but all kinds of other things. Sometimes a very simple deviation off the main path, and the user is lost.
Hmm.
And detecting that the user is lost is tough to begin with, because users don't say nothing when they're lost. They say all kinds of things
Yeah.
that the machine now has to recognize to know that the user is lost, and then has to do things to get the user back on track. Those error paths add up to the death of 1,000 cuts.
Hmm.
Every interface fails for different reasons, and the designers most often have a large set of end users that they don't know, especially in the telephone caller automation
Hmm.
world. And all they have is sheets full of statistics, and they can see which calls failed and which calls didn't. But they can't really observe the humanness of the interaction and recognize what it is that went wrong. And even if they could, you can't go through fixing each individual mole that you're whacking in your game of whack-a-mole. You have to
Hmm.
think about error recovery generically. You have to think about paths that go off the beaten path and then come back onto the beaten path. Error recovery is 80% of your design.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of
Um,
course, the key to error recovery is error prevention. And that means using language in a way that is especially well structured and effective.
yeah. I think I totally agree. Obviously, that a lot is spent on, say, the happy path, right, and
Mm-hmm.
not enough on what actually, as you said, what are the dangers
Mm-hmm.
to a conversation or a dialogue failing.
And sometimes
Um,
they're very subtle. Sorry to interrupt you, but you made
yeah.
me
Yeah.
think of one of the simplest examples is um, assuming that your speech recognizer is good at detecting out of domain or out of vocabulary. They used to call it out of grammar,
Hmm.
but that stuff has kind of evolved a great deal lately.
Hmm.
Detecting that the user is not saying things that you understand or know what they are, you, the machine. Um, the question is then, what do you do about it?
Yeah.
And a classic solution that many, many people have done for years and years is to say, in a kind of a casual way, I didn't get that. So the user goes, blah, 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 blah. And the machine goes, I didn't get that. Well, the problem with that response is that it doesn't tell the user what to do about the problem. All it does is declare that the machine knows now that there's a problem.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of like grabbing the user and then putting him down on the ground, facing outward off the cliff. They could maybe choose to back up if they only knew how to. They're afraid to actually try something because is the machine going to not get it again?
Hmm.
Or do we try to rephrase what we had? What part didn't the machine get? What what do I do? You know? And it's just a very simple example of walking the user toward a goal and then suddenly slamming the door in front of them.
Yeah.
And so you have to ask yourself then, well, what can I do? I'm not very bright. I'm trying to interact with this user who knows more than I do about everything. This
Hmm.
user knows more about language, more
Hmm.
about their specific problem, more about how to solve that problem in their opinion than I do. And yet I'm trying to guide the user
Hmm.
and work toward a common or a mutual goal. And if you think that way as a designer, then you begin to reject some of the solutions that have traditionally been tried and failed and start instead thinking of a new, rich set of alternative solutions.
Hmm.
And by and large, those are not human like.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like the word
Exactly. Yeah.
mechanomorphic rather than anthropomorphic to
Yeah.
describe that phenomenon.
Absolutely. We'll get into that. But let's just double click, so to speak, on that specific situation where the the voice bot. Let's use the term voice bot to encompass all kinds of
Sure.
voice automation. So the voice bot doesn't know what you said. Doesn't know whether it is a variation of something that it can handle or whether it is totally out of scope in terms of what it can do. What would be a simple tip here in terms of what the designer should do? They should not do. I didn't understand you, but what should they do as an example that you could give, perhaps?
Well, the first is to make explicit decisions about two aspects of the dialogue: launch and directedness.
Hmm.
Launching is like essentially initiative. Who takes the initiative? So,
Hmm.
launch, when a user picks up a phone and calls a call center, that's a user launched
Hmm.
dialogue. The
Hmm.
machine answers the phone and knows that there's a user at the other end that made this call. And all the machine has to do is then start asking proper questions to get the user to specify what exactly it is that they want to know or do or whatever. Directedness means who's in charge of the conversation, who's driving the conversation forward. Is it the user or is it the machine? Or is it sometimes the directedness gets handed back and forth
Hmm.
in the dialogue? Make those decisions explicit. And the person who's directing the dialogue or the entity that's directing the dialogue becomes the one who has the responsibility for asking the right question at the right time and bounding the question in such a way as to guide the user naturally into a useful path, and refusing to let the user direct you or deflect you in other directions. A classic example is a yes no question.
Hmm.
You let the user answer yes no questions in all kinds of crazy ways, and the next thing you know, you're out in the weeds.
Hmm.
And you've kind of set them up for that by being chatty, being conversational, being human like. You've encouraged them to exhibit social behaviors and a wider array of different linguistic devices, only to trip and fall on their face. So if the machine's responsible for directing, then it has to keep the dialogue on track and make sure that deviations are both detected and well managed. If, on the other hand, you turn the control completely over to the user and the user gets to present, then the first rule, of course, is the machine needs to back off a little bit in terms of talking and start doing a lot more listening.
Hmm.
And the danger is then how what are the rules of the conversation, and is the user aware of what those rules are? And thinking that way is one of the first things that I try to hand to my students. In other words, start at a high level, abstracted philosophical level,
Yeah.
and then go down to the mechanics. What is a vocabulary? How does speech work? What are the nature of phonetic spellings and pronunciations, and how do we change turns? All of those kinds of mechanical things, which are complex and manifold. But I don't like to start there. I like to start with what are you doing and why are you doing it?
Hmm. Yeah. Wonderful. Um, so here's a one of my favorite books. This guy over here. It
It's quite colorful, isn't it?
is colorful and it is fun to read, and actually, um, it's something it's a book that I recommend. And here's a previous book, if you remember it. This guy.
I do remember that one. That one's showing its age.
Well,
That still has
it's
some good things in it, but
no,
there's
it has a lot
others
of
that are
good things.
completely obsolete. I would tear those pages out
Yeah.
if I could.
No, I would not tear anything out because I think um, the problems that usually a book is useful in terms of the problems that it frames more than the solutions.
I agree. That's kind of what its intent is. It's a
Right, exactly.
reductionist, basically a
Yes,
reductionist model that says break your problem down into lots and lots of little pieces.
yes, exactly. And I think that's one of the skills that the novice designer, whether it's voice or anywhere, needs to learn is how to slice the word and what kind of questions to ask, and
Hmm.
and so that they can devise strategies and they can be flexible in how they tackle problems that maybe they may be facing for the first time. So these books really make you think about questions. One may agree or not agree with what you're saying, but one cannot disagree that certain, well, probably all of the things that you raise are important questions for the designer to ask. So
That'd be a good that'd be a
yeah,
good machine book. Um, uh, a lot of people think it's a bit snarky, which of course it is. It's deliberately written to be satirical, not so much
yeah,
sarcastic or insulting, but satirical, so that we can all laugh at ourselves, at our foibles.
yeah. The book's title is "It's better to be a good machine than a bad person." Sort of, um, sort of defines where you stand in in this debate about
Hmm.
how human should a voice bot be and all that good stuff. So before I go there, because I think that's where the fun will be in terms of the conversation. Before I go there, I wanna show this video to the audience. I think the video will kick off this conversation. Um, and then after that, you and I will chat. I think you and I both are on the same side, so to speak, of this debate. I don't know, you know, I don't know what the argument of the other side is, but I think you and I probably can on their behalf say, okay, this is why they're going that way, and this is why we stand where we stand. Anyway, here's a video for the audience, and then after that, you and I will talk.
Hi, I'm calling to book a woman's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd.
It turns out a big part of getting things done is making a phone call. We think AI can help with this problem. Let's say you want to ask Google to make you a haircut appointment on Tuesday between 10 and noon. What happens is the Google Assistant makes the call seamlessly in the background for you. So what you're going to hear is the Google Assistant actually calling a real salon to schedule the appointment for you. Let's listen.
So how can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a woman's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd.
Sure, give me 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, what time are you looking for around?
At 12 p.m.
We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15.
Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.?
Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for?
Just a woman's haircut for now.
Okay, we have a 10 o'clock.
10 a.m. is fine.
Okay, what's her first name?
The first name is Lisa.
Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Okay, so um, so what do you think at at the baseline level in terms of your philosophy and your stand, and what that demo shows the audience? As you saw, the audience that like they appreciated the fact that the voice bot did certain things that were really human, like hesitating and all that. What are your thoughts? What's your gut reaction?
Well, of course, it was a friendly audience, and no one had any stake in the outcome of the transaction. So it's very good marketing, is what I would say. And it's more than just good marketing because it does show off um, astoundingly good technology. The technology itself works very well, and I think that's we're sort of at a major juncture in this industry because now that the technology works well, we have to ask ourselves, what good is it? What can I use this technology to do now that it can do essentially anything? I'm reminded of an old Beatles song lyric. Now that you know who you are, what do you want to be? And the same thing is true with speech. Really? Really? We're going to have a user go through a proxy to make a phone call to book a haircut? The amount of time it will take the user to interact with the machine, telling it what to call somebody else to do, is the same amount of time that the user is going to spend booking it in the first place. And of course, what's not shown in the dialogue is the many, many times that the problem can't be solved. No, we're full up today or Wednesday the 7th. We're full up and we don't have any slots, not even between 10 and 2. What do you got? And the proxy says, well, I don't know. I'm going to have to go ask Lisa. I'll get back to you. You know? So now you've got a third party that's standing between the end user
Mhm.
and the decision maker with no real value add, no real advantage. And then you throw in the disfluencies, the that was one that they really liked,
Mhm.
mm-hmm, and the elongation of one of the words on the 7th,
Mhm.
those kinds of
Yeah.
typical speech disfluencies and so forth, they serve no purpose. There is no functional purpose for those. They're exclusively entertaining. And the problem is, of course, that the user that is actually taking this appointment or order doesn't even know they're talking to a machine, and so the entertainment just goes right past them. It's not designed to entertain those users. It's designed to entertain the Google audience that loves to see things that look like they could be cool and are very difficult to do, but somebody needs to sit down and say, yeah, now that we can do this, now what do we really need to do? How can we really accomplish something that needs to be accomplished and that's difficult to be accomplished? And
Mhm.
this video, what is it, about 3 years old now?
Yeah.
Um, I haven't seen answers to that question forthcoming.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so my reaction really is the following: even if that transaction did save time for the person, right? Lisa, I guess, right? Even if it did, um, don't you think that this kind of framing the quest of us folks who are building these voice bots, framing it as that's where we need to go, isn't that framing sort of just counterproductive? And let me explain what I mean by that. So, um, as you all know, you have let's think of a quadrant, right? A quadrant where you have effort, level of effort, right, on the x-axis, and value delivered on the y-axis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what we want to do is we want to the upper right, which is the best quadrant, should be the least effort for the most bang, right? Um, Now, delivering that particular interaction was a lot of effort, right? A lot of technology and effort and design and all that kind of stuff and research and so on. I don't know how many millions of dollars literally it took for that thing to be done to the extent that it was. So a lot of bang. Now, for me, the so that's the bank, right? That's sort of that is the investment. That's the level of effort. Now, for me, the value is not only low, right? I think the value is negative, and let me explain by what I mean by negative.
Hmm. That's
When I
interesting.
when I speak with a voice bot, right? There are things that I do that I would not do with a human being. I can ask it to repeat something 10 times, right? I didn't get it 10 times. I can say, can you you're done, stop, right? I can raise my voice. I can do many things that enable me to get through this interaction the way I want to get through the interaction, right? Now, if I think it's a human being, I'm going to observe certain rules which are taxing, which is I'm going to be careful how I phrase things. I'm not going to raise my voice. I may raise my voice just because I want to clear my voice. I don't know, or it's loud, right? But when I'm talking to
Yes.
somebody, I have to say, I'm sorry. There is background noise. I need to raise my voice, right, so that they don't think it's a social transgression from me. So for me, not only is it the value is low, the value is negative. I don't want the bots to behave like a human being. Number one, certainly I don't want it to behave like a human to such an extent that I don't know that it is not a human being. I want to know if let's say if it's behaving the way I need to know that it's a bot, so I can say I can interrupt it. All right, I can say, can you say that again? Can you say that again? I can't do that to a human being. I can say, can you say that again? Can you say again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. So I have to spend time, right? Now, that person who was talking to the voice bot, right, had to expend, energy being polite and being and all that when it didn't have to, when the person didn't have to do it with that. So that's where I stand. I see this not only as being misguided, but or inefficient, but misguided, fundamentally misguided. What do you think?
I agree with everything that you just said, and I think it is an interesting way of looking at it. Basically, the balancing of investment versus value. Um, in many cases, uh, when we're hunting for a good reason to use speech,
Mm-hmm.
then there's a number of criteria that are useful, and making it very human-like is extremely low on the list of criteria.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a reason to make it human-like, and it's a good reason,
Mm-hmm.
then sure, it's
Mm-hmm. Yep.
the idea of having a fully human-like conversational experience is not a bad thing necessarily if the goal is reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
but it does have negative value if that's not the point of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
A classic
Mm-hmm.
example is emotions. I hear people always talking about how we want to detect emotions on the part of the user
Mm-hmm.
and present emotions back, reflect it back. In other words, project the user's emotions back again, like a mirror or something like that. Bad idea. First of all, we don't detect emotions, we detect the arousal level of the user
Mm-hmm.
that is one of the underlying physical aspects of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So things like rapid breathing, constrained and constricted vocal cords, etc. Those are the kinds of things that we can detect. We can't detect anger, sadness, happiness. Those are
You can infer them,
multiple
perhaps.
layers
Yeah.
above.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the only, or I would say the best way to detect those is to experience them
Mm-hmm.
and to empathize with why it is that they're happening. Well, the machine is not even conscious, let alone possesses the body capable of producing
Mm-hmm.
emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So anything the machine is going to do is going to be pretended and
Mm-hmm.
not real. And the second problem is when it comes to the machine presenting emotions, I like to show people the chart that shows valence and intensity of the various emotions and on a chart. Here's happiness and joy up here. Here's anger and sadness down here, and on the left side and the right side, different various things. And I say, make a check mark next to every one of those that are appropriate for a machine to exhibit.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing you notice is they stay away from anger. There's no reason for a machine to be angry, ever.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly angry in a way that's intimidating to the user. Can't be threatening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it seems pointless for it to be sad and self pitying. What exactly are the emotions? And the answer is the two or three things that call center agents do: be polite, be
Mm-hmm.
professional. In other words, non emotions.
Yeah.
And that's what the voice bot needs to be focused on. So stop thinking about things like that are so pointless, because you're not trying to build another human. It's better to be a good machine and not a bad person.
Yeah. On the first page of the book, let me just read this here. So, which I think sums up exactly what you're saying. The future. So, this is the future that you are advocating, right? A
Mhm.
future that is vaguely not unlike the present, except that user interfaces serve their users rather than serving designers, visionaries, futurists, and dilettantes,
Mhm.
which is, I think,
I
what you were
forgot I
saying,
wrote
right?
that. But yes, that's exactly the point.
All right. And it doesn't look like Well, at least in some quarters, it doesn't look like people have advanced their thinking about or sharpened it, right? About what is it we're trying to do here, right? There's this confusion about wow, listen to you can't tell the difference between this this bot and a human being, and then the question, okay, so you have accomplished a feat, very nice, very good, and so what do we do with it now? So here's a thing that I think I became conscious of just recently, even though I've been thinking about this for the longest time. And it was triggered by actually your book as I was reading a random passage, which is the following: that we have seen the emergence of technologies like, I don't know, the radio, and the television and the microwave oven, toaster, not in that order, and and so on and so forth. And initially, if you when you look at version 1.0 of the radio, is pretty bad, right? But at the
Hmm.
time, it was seen as amazing, which it was because it started from zero. From zero, and you have this thing that you can barely hear, but oh my gosh, it's a human being talking, and they are very, very far away, and I can hear them, right? Um, and then it evolved. And the same thing with everything else. The toaster probably burned your toast 95% of the time, but it was it was on its way, in the fridge and everything else. It started from zero, and now we have almost perfect everything, perfect toaster and perfect TV that
And
we
are we happier?
yeah. Well, that's a different question. The point really is the following: that it seems to me that if we call voice bots a technology, right, and we say, okay, you have toasters and you have all these kinds of machines, and you also have in the mix a voice bot. It seems that the voice bot is a very weird kind of technology, in that it is probably uh, the only one of the very few that we are never satisfied with, even though there is progress, right? So the
Hmm.
toaster and everything, there is progress. We are happier and happier with that particular technology, right? Because
Hmm.
why? Because we're always comparing it to something version 1.0 and 1.1 and 2.0, and we are at version 15, and so we're happy. And then when we are in version 25, we're going to look back at version 15, we're going to laugh at it. But for voice bots, and tell me if you think this theory is or this thinking, is justified. For voice bots, we are comparing it to some perfection, right? As opposed to from a previous version. We're not saying, oh, the bots of today are much better than the bots of 20 years ago. We're saying the bots of today still suck because they don't do as well as a human being, right? Well, do you think there's merit to that kind of framing? Why voice bots? We are dissatisfied with them almost perpetually. It feels.
Absolutely, I do. Yes, you're talking about expectations, basically,
Yeah.
and the setting of expectations. When you bring out incremental changes to most technologies, those incremental changes can be promoted because of what they do for the buyer. Come buy my new toaster because now you can set your darkness setting better,
Hmm.
or it's got a wider slot, can take larger bread. The users are already aware of what's missing from the product, so
Hmm.
that when incremental change comes, they can embrace the incremental change and enjoy it. In the case of speech, the products that keep being sold keep not doing much of anything for anybody. And the flaws are really hard to put your finger on because you're not, well, the key is you're not relying on the technology because it's not reliable. And the marketing
Hmm.
people keep changing the technology in ways that make it more complex and more unreliable in the hopes that it'll be sexier and cuter, cooler,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and forgetting that they're trying to solve some problems. A really good example, a conversation came up the other day. Arthur C. Clarke, do you remember, the science fiction
Yep.
writer,
Yep.
made the comment, um, any sufficiently sophisticated technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Hmm.
And the speech universe loves to quote that. And in fact, I think that the quote is exactly backwards. Any technology, sophisticated or not, initially is like magic. What, you put bread into this thing and what comes out is toast? Wow, that's magic.
Hmm.
It stops being magic when you start relying on it.
Mm.
When you say, how many of you guys want toast for breakfast? Okay, I'm going to throw these things in. I'm going to make toast. I've stopped thinking about the technology now.
Yep.
It's not magic because the key attribute of magic is the absence of causality.
Mm.
And speech exhibits that trait. Speech appears to be magic because it's not really very useful. And when it breaks, which it always will, then you learn once again that you can't rely on it. For example, you're using your smartphone and you're holding it to your ear, and the bus drives by or the laughter in the restaurant. You can't hear it, it can't hear you. The conversation has failed. And everybody can say, oh, well, it doesn't, we have problems with noise and that sort of thing. Well, the user says, then I better not make that be my only channel of accomplishment. I better be able to fall back on something because I can't rely on this technology. As soon as you come to rely on it, that's proof that it's useful. And being useful removes the magic and replaces it with what we in this modern technological world simply accept as a fact of life.
Yeah, yeah,
I hope that the speech industry will discover some of those applications someday.
yeah. Well, I mean, this here is thing here, which is the Echo. Um,
Yeah.
it is very reliable for certain things, and I have come to
Yes,
rely on
absolutely.
it. Right. So, do you have one of those? I guess you do, or not?
I do indeed. I,
Yeah,
I keep mine in the kitchen, and it satisfies the fundamental need of eyes busy, hands busy.
yeah,
Busy.
yeah,
And so I rely on it for example, setting kitchen timers
yep,
or making conversions. I'm always asking Alexa
yep,
how many cups are in a liter, and questions like that, because I know I can go and look it up or whatever. But the convenience coupled with the
yep,
fact that even when my hands are messy, I can deal with it. Um, that's value. That's not huge value, but the beauty of it, of course, the thing that makes it such a good product is that um, Alexa does all of those different things. Um, and I can just pick and choose which ones. I think most people, when they use Alexa, home in on the two or three things that are most useful to them
yep,
and stick with that. Try to
yep,
have a conversation with her about something that's happening in the modern day world or news that you can go look up on the web. That gets old real fast.
yeah,
And
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the
stop
whole
doing it.
thing. It is a tool, and I'm glad that people are starting to see it as a tool. All right.
Mhm.
And so they don't expect much of it, which is fabulous, right? Because I think that's how we should engage with technologies.
And the
Um,
price is right.
and the price is right, right? And it's reliable, and it does what I wanted to do. Again, I have only a number, handful of things I wanted to do. It does them very, very well and reliably. And in fact, I'm not going to ask for the weather using my iPhone here. It just doesn't make sense. Ask, is the post office open? I don't go to my, because it's faster. I ask for
Mhm.
the weather tomorrow, whether it's gonna how cold it's gonna be tonight. Those things I ask it reliably. It gives them back to me, and so like you said, um, it becomes non-magic, which is it becomes invisible, so to speak. It becomes part of the
Yeah.
fabric of my life. I think, like you said, that means that technology has succeeded. And so my frustration really is with these things like the Google Duplex, that just confuse people. And how many, think about this, how many of those people in the audience said, this is really, I want to be part of this thing being making robots sound like human beings, right? How many people have been given the wrong mission, so to speak, to tackle,
Mhm.
as opposed to, I want to be part of, a team of people that makes this technology useful. Forget about making it sound like a human being. Useful. It could be beeps. It could be whatever it may be. It could be, I don't know. It could be it hears noises and helps you, figure out what's going on. Focus on the problem, all right, as opposed to the technology. And 2018, when that demo was given, it was really. I mean, I was really disappointed because it was really, we are still focused on showcasing the technology, right?
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
still trying to wow people.
Yeah.
It's like pollution. That demo is pollution, in my opinion. It pollutes the minds of folks about what is the thing that we designers and product managers and UX researchers should be doing. um, anyway, I'm preaching to the choir, so to speak. Although the choir is me, not you, because I've been hearing all these things from you. So I'm just regurgitating, what you have been saying all these years.